So this is what we refer to, this tree stand is what we refer to as a sugar bush. So a typical sugar bush density is going to be about 50 to 60 trees or more per acre. The or more part is kind of interesting because you would think more is better. However, when you get to that point, you start to suffocate the canopy, and that's actually where you need to do some forest management. So this stand here specifically, there's about 1,400 taps, so it's 1,400 taps that all run down to our sugar house. Here on this farm, we have the pleasure that there's actually 6,000 taps right here around our sugar house that we can obtain all within a mile of our sap house. So I'll kind of go through a couple of the measures of where we started. So up here, we'll go in a little bit more detail for than what we were on in the school tour, so I can explain a little bit more in depth. So this unit right here, this is what we call a Sap Booster. Now, as I was saying before, we're actually putting vacuum on the lines. So this vacuum gauge, it's a 15 pressure to -30 vacuum. So as you can see, if zero's at the top, we have the vacuum running right now, and I'm pulling just over 20 inches of vacuum. So what that means is that there's actually a leak somewhere up this line. So as you can see with all of these valves, I can isolate them and turn them off. So by doing so, we can actually increase the vacuum on our system. So you can see I turned a couple of them off and we gained a little bit of vacuum there. So we know that the lines that were turned off, there's actually going to be no leaks. But when you open them back up, if the vacuum gauge goes down, we know that there's a leak. Now, when I say that there's a leak, what that leak refers to could be anything from a squirrel hole to a line pulled apart, a tap that we missed when we're drilling, or even if just some catastrophe happened and you show up and you have no idea what happened. So what we'll do is we'll slowly walk over and we'll get a little bit closer to the maple tree. But as you can see here with these bigger lines, these are what we call main lines. So the main lines act as a highway system. So for each one of these main lines that shoots out, there's about 200 to 300 taps on it. So the purpose of it is with more taps, you increase your volume of sap. Now, the reason for this booster is on top, we have a dry line, and on the bottom, I have a wet line. So the purpose of this is that the vacuum is actually able to come all the way from the sugar house, resistance free, to this canister. And then this line, this 1-inch line, can actually go all the way to the sugar house, and it can be 100% full and not have any air leaks. So is there any of you guys have any questions? All right, so then we'll go here to this tree. So an interesting part about maple trees that not a lot of people realize, this tree right here has the potential to be nearly 200 years old. So with that being said, there's a good chance that being here on this farm, this tree has been tapped over 100 years in a row. So one rule of thumb that we do here on our farm, if we can put our arms around it, it gets 1 tap. And if we can't put our arms around it, it gets 2 taps. So for example, this tree here, you can see has 1 tap here. We have the 2nd tap over there. So now when we talk about like the anatomy of the tubing system, the blue part that goes into the tree, that's a spile. And then the pink part is what's referred to as the drop line. And then the light blue, the little lines, is what are the lateral. And then we have an entrance fitting where the sap goes in. So unfortunately today we're about 22 degrees and dropping. So the sap's not really running all that great. But hopefully by this weekend, we'll see a little bit of increasing temperature. And then with that, the sap will start to run. So we'll walk over here to this stand, and I can explain a little bit more about what causes the sap to actually run per se. So I'm sure a lot of you, I know I heard in some of the introductions, we've got some chemistry and biology backgrounds. The whole purpose of the sap is that it's actually feeding the tree. So right now, all of the sap is in the base of the tree and is dormant for the winter. And then as spring comes around, we know that the sap is trying to get all the way out to the branches to yield sugar to grow the leaves for photosynthesis. So like on this tree, when we have the cold nights and cold days like right now, the sap is all deep in the root systems. And then as it warms up, the tree expands and the sap goes up the tree. So the spile, we're actually tapping into a vein of the tree to actually capture a little bit of the sap. Now, if you were looking top down on the tree, you would know that the center of the tree is the heartwood, then you have the sapwood, then the bark. So we're right here, we're in just the sapwood. Now, the reason why we only put one tap on the smaller tree is because your sucking radius on vacuum is 14 inches. So that means 7 inches to the right, 7 inches to the left is where we're actually gathering sap from. So on a small tree like this, you wouldn't need to put more than one tap. Is there any questions about how or why we're tapping the trees?
Yes, Julia has a question. Yes, go ahead, Julia.
You had mentioned that this weekend's temperatures might be better for you.
Yes.
I'm down in Orange County, and I looked at our weather forecast, and it has our nights on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday being 33, 45, and 35. Should I be considering pulling my taps after that?
So you said consider pulling them?
Yes, because I heard somewhere that if you have 2 consecutive nights of above freezing, you should pull them.
No, absolutely not. So I can tell you, I can tell you that right now we're at the beginning of the season. So I just got all the taps put in here last week. So putting in 6,000 taps, it takes a little bit longer than putting in 2 or 3 in your backyard. But once this cold snap kind of gets over, we're going to get into what we call like sugaring season. So you're going to have about 2 to 3 weeks of good hard running. And what we're looking for is warm days and cold nights. Now, that being said, so like this weekend, there's going to be a couple nights where it's going to be warm all the way through. All that's going to do is it's going to make your buckets or your collection units full all the time because the sap is going to actually be running around the clock. So for a maple producer, that's what we want. That's really good. Now, something to take into consideration, you can't really see it here, but in the woods with the snow, we actually don't see it here right now, is they call it bowling. And what the bowling is when the snow melts around the base of the tree. So if you come up here and we look at some of these other trees, you can start to see that with the sun, that's where the snow is going to melt first. And in order for the sap to run really good, you need to see that bowling start to occur. So if you look here, right where the camera's pointed, you can see how it looks like somebody almost dug that snow around. This morning we did have a dusting of snow, so a lot of the bowls were filled in. But yeah, no, back to your question, the sap season is just beginning, so don't pull your taps.
When would you recommend the cutoff is based on locations?
Yeah, so typically, now being in New York State, I think most of you are, we're all going to be kind of on the same region and time snap. But if you're down south, you're going to end a lot sooner than up north. And I can't tell you, you know, April 15th, you're going to be done. That's part of agriculture. It's Mother Nature, right? So it's different every year. Here on our farm, I can tell you our elevation is about 1,800 feet. We almost always make syrup on Easter. And then after that, the best way to tell is observe the sap. So when the sap comes out of the tree, it's going to be very clear. It's going to look like water, and it's only 2% sugar. So it's going to have a very subtly sweet taste, but it's going to be crystal clear. Now, at the end of your season, what's going to happen when it goes bad or when you're ready to pull your taps, it's going to get this milky color. So it's going to and it's going to have a very poignant smell, and it's going to be very obvious that that's not good maple sap. And the reason for that is because the buds are starting to come out at the tips of your branches, and when that happens, all of the sugar has gone to the buds, and then you start to get a little bit of yeast growing in your sap. So that's what turns it that milky color. And if you let the sap sit too far, you will then create the fermentation process, and you can actually create a pretty potent vinegar that's not very palatable or smells very good.
Thank you so much. That's huge because now I can leave my taps up and I can keep syruping for a while. This is great. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so before I go on with this, all of you will have access to our email and everything. please reach out. If you have any personal questions, if you're tapping trees with your classroom, or you're doing it with your own kids, or just yourself out of curiosity, I will answer the phone 24/7, but please don't call me at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's when I try to get some sleep. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and no question's a stupid question. So, is there any more questions while we're up here in the sugar woods?
Teresa has a question about maple trees and types of maples.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, do you have to use the sugar maples or can you use any type of maple?
So you can use any type of maple. So this is a perfect example right here. So this tree right here, this is still a young tree, but this is actually what we call a hard maple, okay? And I'm gonna tell you it's because of the way it is. But basically, you can tap hard maples, and then here to my right, this is actually a soft maple. So you can see how the bark is differentiated a little bit, but both of them are sap yielding. They're both in the Acer family. With a soft maple, typically you're going to get more volume of sap, but the sugar content is going to be lower. Now, we talked about that RO in a bucket. You'll see the RO in our sugar house. With the RO, you can tap both trees, and both sap is going to make quality maple syrup. In the olden days, if you saw this soft maple, you would walk right past it because it was twice the amount of boiling to boil this sap versus this sap. Now, there's other types of maples. You'll have your silvers, your reds. There's a Norwegian maple that's more towards central New York. They all are going to yield maple sap, and you can tap them all. You're just going to have a little bit deviance in flavor of your maple syrup, and that we'll get into later with your sample kits about the different flavors that you can obtain with the different trees.
So Damian, as we transition to the side-by-side and start heading down to the sugar house, could you tell our teachers a little bit about your education pathway and being a recent Cornell graduate in the last year or so, and why you decided to come to the farm?
Yep. So there's kind of growing up here on the farm. So I've been here my whole life, and I've developed a very strong passion for maple and agriculture. So I started my career actually out in Alfred, New York, where I was just studying generic business, and I wanted more out of it, and I wanted more ag involvement. So that's when I transferred to Cornell. At Cornell, I studied applied economics and management, and I had a double concentration in ag business and food industry management production. So with that, it kind of gave me a pretty large background, but it was all relevant to the family business. My goals that I was hoping to obtain out of my Cornell degree was a strong network, and I got to learn about other types of agriculture. But more importantly, I wanted to learn how I could come home and grow the family business and keep it in the family name. As you guys know, it's been this farm's been in our family for over 100 years. So being a third generation farmer, I've got a lot of passion for the land that's been given to me and allowed for me to become owner of. So with the ownership side by side with my dad and my uncle, I'm hoping that I can carry on the family tradition for years to come. And with new world markets and innovation, you have to be able to adapt. So as you can see here, this is where the maple sap is coming down to the sugar house. The black line is what we're calling the dry line, and the blue line is the wet line. Now in the far there, you can see maybe on the zoom camera, that big open field. Every year we work with our local 3rd and 4th grade teachers, and they come out and all of the students get to actually plant a maple tree, learn the genetics of the tree,
Well,
the house that we currently use. But first we'll there.
oh, we're delayed on our video. Oh, okay, perfect. We're at the sugar house. Okay, I think we're caught up now.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take a short walk over here. So when my grandfather came to the farm in the 70s, this is where we used to make our maple syrup. So we had 2,000 taps. However, instead of having the network of tubing, they were actually on buckets. So they would actually go and gather the buckets. It started off with horses, and then they eventually upgraded to a tractor with a wagon. But here in this old sap house, we had wood-fired evaporators. And when my dad and uncle joined, they started adding more taps. During maple season, both evaporators would be running around the clock, 24/7. One year, for example, my dad's senior year, he boiled for 14 days straight on the arch. So he would wake up, he did go to school, and then when he came home, he'd sleep for an hour, and then they would boil all night long and then get on the school bus in the morning. So after that, we decided that it was time to do a little bit of an upgrade. So then in 1984 was when the partnership was established with my grandfather, my dad and uncle. And then we built this sugar house in the early 90s. So as you can see here, our sugar house is 3 steps. So we started off, we built the front for a storefront, and that's where we did a lot of our bottle. And then we decided to upgrade our production facility, and that's where we're going to walk into now.
So we may have just a little bit of a delay as they walk into this big metal building. They're going to switch to the Wi-Fi network. So now next we'll see the next steps in the process once that sap has been pulled down the hill into their collection facility. So we should be back with Damian in just a moment. But be sure to unmute yourself, ask any questions that you have as we look at these next steps in the process.
That's weird that I forgot it.
All right, I think we can hear you. We just can't see you yet.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but we can't see you. There we go.
All right, now you're back in. So as you can see here, he'll point the camera up. So we have actually 2 sugar woods that are coming in. This is my Uncle David on the left. So we've got up top there's the black and blue line. Those are taps that are coming from across the road that we're actually pumping up over. So it actually does go over the town road. And then our north woods with these bigger lines that you can see over here, they come down. So what we can do is you can walk right up and show them. So I'll stand back here so you can still hear me talking. But he's gonna point to the box in the back, and what that is that they vacuum pump. So just like in the dairy industry and your regular vacuum pumps, however, this one's a little bit different. This is has a variable speed motor on it, and the reason for that is during the sugar in season, we'll actually leave that on 24/7. So then when it freezes, what'll happen is the variable speed will actually slow down to maintain the vacuum, and then when things warm up, it turns back on. Now he'll shift the camera over to the 2 blue cylinders here on the left, which is the releaser. So we call it a releaser because it releases the sap. So there's 2 cylinders, one on the left, one on the right. So the sap comes in the head module there in the front, and then there's the only vacuum is on 1 cylinder. Okay, so then what happens is while that cylinder is filling with sap, the other one, there's no vacuum, and the sap with gravity flows out. So then it's just like your toilet bowl float. It'll flow up and it'll trip the releaser. And then the one that was empty is now going to have vacuum on it to fill up while the other one can dump. Now that tank that he's showing you right now, that is a 2,600 gallon tank. So 2,600 gallons. And on a given day, that will be full. And then this other tank here to my right that he's looking at, that tank there is 5,500 gallons. So that tank is a dual purpose tank. So it's there for sap storage, but we also have it for permeate, which I'll get into when we talk about the ROs. But more about the sap, something that I didn't highlight yet, when we make maple syrup, each tree is going to only yield about a quart of maple syrup. So in terms of boiling, that's almost 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So when we were up in the woods, every single time that you saw a tap into the tree, you could equate that to roughly a quart of maple syrup, okay? However, that's almost 10 gallons of sap. So on a normal day with 6,000 taps, we end up with about 6,000 gallons of sap. So back to sugar content, the sap comes in at 2% sugar, our maple syrup is actually 67% sugar. So that's a pretty big jump to get all that water out. So in order to aid that process, we use what's called a reverse osmosis machine. So this is what we call an RO for short. And what this machine is it looks very fancy, but it's very simple. It's a glorified pressurized filter. So we have 4 membranes, right? And so when the sap comes in at 2%, through high pressure filtration, we're actually able to extract pure water. So when you extract pure water, the sugar content goes up. So normally when it's at 2% sugar, when it exits this machine, we're at 10% water, or 10% sugar, excuse me. So by doing that, if you do the math, that's over 2/3 of the water comes out of the sap before the boiling process. Does anybody have any questions for the RO or the releaser vacuum pump?
Can you talk a little bit, Damian, about how maple producers like to rip off technologies from others to use it in for their own benefit?
Yeah, yep. So that vacuum pump that you saw, a lot of you are probably familiar with the old glass style vacuum pumps that were in your dairy milk houses. All that vacuum pump is just a glorified dairy pump. And there's actually still some maple producers that use that technology. Now, like with this RO, out on your ships, out to sea, they use these machines not to do the same thing, but similarly, they actually take the water out of the ocean and they run it through an RO, and they actually take that permeate, which is the water that comes out, and they add minerals back to it so that they can have potable water on the ships. They also use reverse osmosis in dairy when they're cleaning the wash water. Other industries use it just for water recycling. You'll see it at wastewater management plants. So with that, there's a lot of technologies that they do the same thing, but then they're kind of retrofitted to that industry. Now, shooting way back to the beginning, they were talking about the RO in a bucket. I just want to note, so your RO in a bucket will take your sap from 2% to 4%. And why that is huge is that's half of the water. Okay. So that means if you had 6 hours of boiling, you now only have to boil for 3 hours. So for somebody with a teacher on a small scale where time is a limiting factor, that could be a huge advantageous thing to speed up the process, whether you're showing kids or if you're trying to manage 2 schools. So from the RO, we go on up and we can see this gravity fed tank up here. So it's about a 350 gallon tank up there. And the neat part about this is from here on out, gravity takes place. There's no more pumps. So from the top, from the tank, it comes down, and then it comes across and through this stainless pipe. And with this stainless pipe, we come to here, which is our float box. So the neat part about this is there's a temperature probe that goes down in, and when the sap level gets too low, then the valve kicks on. When the sap gets to the high point, the valve turns it off. So from there, we can maintain a regulated boiling rate. Now, on our evaporator here, we actually have 3 parts. There's a hood, a steam away, and then the back pan. So the sap comes into the steam away first. However, the steam away is actually a recycling agent. So what happens is when the sap starts to boil in the back pan here, the steam away captures that steam, condenses it back to hot water, and then we're actually passing the cold sap through the steam away to then preheat the sap. So not only is the RO an energy efficient saver, this too is. So this will actually allow that 10% sap to go up even farther before it even hits the back pan. So with the combination of the RO and the steam away, we're actually boiling with 25% less energy and 25% of the total time that it would normally take. So then from the steam away, it comes right into your back pan. Again, we have another double float system. When it wants sap, the valve opens. When it's out of sap, it closes. So then what I can explain about that, the back pan is very unique. So this is what we call flues. So the fire would be in these pockets right here, okay? So on this evaporator, we burn with oil. So you have excruciating hot flames going through here, and then the sap would be what's sitting on top of these flues. Now it's shaped like this because we want to increase the surface area of the heat to the sap. So that's what allows us to get our rapid boil rate. So if this was just a straight across flat pan, you would have less surface area with the metal to the heat. Now, keep in mind, with burning the oil, we're going to have a stack temperature of over 2000 degrees, which is really important because we need that hot fire to get things moving along. So then after the sap comes into the back pan, it's going to work its way into our front pan or our finishing pan. So we have the sap, it comes in from the back pan at about 180 degrees to our front pan. Now, water is going to boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Maple syrup boils at 7 degrees over the boiling point of water. So what's unique is depending on your elevation and where you are, and depending on the weather, your boiling point can actually change. So here on this arch, the sap comes around, goes all the way to the back, and then it's going to snake its way all the way back and forth through these channels. And you can see that there's still some syrup in there from when we first boiled. And then here we have a temperature module again. So when on that post, when it tells us that it's 219 degrees, this valve down here will actually, from that orange cable, will automatically open. So we'll automatically draw the syrup off when it's ready to go. So now when maple syrup first comes off, through the boiling process, you're going to have the creation of what's called niter. So here in this bucket, this is niter. So it's also known as a sugar sand. And what it is, it's excess minerals that are as a natural byproduct of syrup. Now, as you can see on Jeremiah's hand, that doesn't look very palatable, which it's not. It would be a very fine, gritty sand. And currently there's no use for it other than to dispose of it. So in order to filter that out, we need to use what's called a filter press. So I believe in your packet, you guys have a sample of a small filter paper. So those filter papers go in between these banks right here. So the ones with the eye hooks here are all open pockets. And what happens is this filter press will fill front to back, and it will actually collect all of that niter or sugar sand. And the reason why we want to take that out is so then the maple syrup can maintain its clear amber color. So with the filter press, with our arch, we're making a gallon of syrup a minute. So to highlight that, that's 60 gallons of syrup an hour that comes off of this evaporator. We can't physically can that. So what has to happen is we have to put it into these drums. So each drum, as you can see, is 40 gallons. So on a given season, we can make in between that quart to half a gallon of syrup. So this year with 6,000 taps, we'll make between 2,500 and 3,000 gallons of syrup. So then with that, with the production of syrup, we'll go over here. We'll highlight more on it later when we talk about the different grades. But so all this maple syrup is the same consistency and everything. The only thing that's different is the color and the grade. So we'll talk a little bit more about why that's really unique. But as you can see, depending on the day that we get the sap, the color and the flavor can differ greatly. Typically what happens is at the beginning of the season, you'll make a lighter syrup, and as the season goes on, it'll darken. These top two shelves, every single little jar represents a barrel of syrup that was produced. However, down here on this shelf, this was the only barrel of syrup that we've made this year so far. So as you can see, our season is just kind of at the head, and we've got a long ways to go. Is there any questions?
Yeah, a couple questions, Damian. So Julia says she's boiled down both maple and walnut and have noticed no sugar sand in the walnut. Do you know if walnut doesn't produce it the same as maple?
So I'm not sure with walnut. I know more about maple, unfortunately. I don't know anything about walnut. But what I will say is it probably has to do with what's actually in the walnut sap. I know that a walnut tree is still an acer tree, which so isn't a maple. But those minerals that are in the sugar sand or the niter with maple, it all has to do with the saturation point. So depending on how many gallons of walnut sap it takes to make a gallon of walnut syrup might be a good determinant of that. And it also could be related to the caramelization and how that affects the chemistry of the walnut syrup. But I don't have a background in walnut, I'm sorry.
So Patty wants to know, how is the maple sand disposed of? Can it be used in any way in your operation, like for fertilizer or something else?
Yeah, so we personally, it goes back into the woods. But what some people are doing with it now, they're actually using it as a face scrub. They've found that those minerals are really good for exfoliation. And there's been a lot of research and development on it. I could tell you that it would make fantastic building material because when it dries out, it's hard as a rock and it could be used as like a cinder block. But yeah, no, other than that, it's a good question. Unfortunately, there's not a huge demand for it, and there hasn't been a market established for it. So then I'll take you into our bottling room. So what's kind of unique is, as I showed before, we make all that syrup, but we can't bottle it right away. So then throughout the year, as we get orders and we see what our demand is, we need to bottle that syrup. So we heat it back up. It always gets refiltered. So all of our syrup is filtered twice, and it goes into this hot water jacketed canner. So with this canner, there's syrup on the inside, and then there's going to be hot water on the outside with two heating elements. So since water boils at 212, while it's in this canner, I can walk away from it and the syrup will theoretically never burn, which is a really valuable tool. And then with these two shutoffs, we have a start and a stop button. As soon as the syrup fills up and it hits this temperature probe, the valve shuts off. So with that, one person can be bottling 2 jugs at a time, and they don't have to necessarily open and close the valve. So like the center one, you have to open it, and then when the bottle's full, you have to close it. Whereas these, you can start it, and you can go on, you can label, you can multitask while you're bottling. This kitchen here is a multi-purpose kitchen. So here, the last 2 weekends of March, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the term Maple Weekend. Our family farm is an active participant in Maple Weekend. For those of you that don't know what that is, the last 2 weekends of March, sugar makers from across the state open up their sugar house and they invite the public to come in. We're one that does pancake breakfast. So those last 2 weekends, we do all you can eat sausage and pancakes. And then we have live horse-drawn wagon rides that will actually give you a horse-drawn wagon ride right to our sugar woods, show you the pump house, explain to you everything that I kind of showed you earlier today about what a maple tree is, how the sap goes up and down, and how it's gathered and brought back to the sugar house. Is there any more questions about the production part?
No, that looks great. Are we going to show a little bit about your value added?
Yeah, so that's where we're headed.
Awesome.
So as we go down here, Jeremiah will show you some of the posters here on the wall. So what's cool about our local schools is we invite the students to come and we give them a full demonstration and tour of our facility. And that's during the maple season and sometimes even during the off season if they so choose. So a value added product that a couple of you saw earlier today that was being made was the maple sugar candies. So these maple sugar candies are pure maple syrup. So there's no sugars added, no caramelization, nothing. So what we do is we use a steam kettle and we heat the syrup up past the boiling point. So we actually take it even farther. And what we're doing is we're making a super saturated solution, right? So we heat it up and then it immediately goes here into the trough. It's stirred a little bit. And then we have these rubber molds that it comes out in. And then those the candy hardens and assumes the shape of a maple leaf. So here on our farm, in this past year, we produced over 2,000 pounds of these candies. And each one of those little candies is about 1/3 of an ounce. So then here also in our maple kitchen, this is a dynamic machine. So there's only 2 of these that have ever been made. This is a maple cream machine. They do make them on the market, but they're smaller. With this, we make the maple cream and the granulated sugar. Maple cream is a spread. Again, there's nothing added to it. It's pure maple syrup. We heat the syrup up and then we cool it in a cold water bath for 4 to 6 hours. And then we stir it on this turntable where we make the spread. Now the granulated sugar, we cook up even farther and then we stir it hot. And because you're stirring it hot, you cause a crystalline structure to form and you create a powder similar to the consistency of white sugar.
So a couple questions, Damian. Patty has some students who are wondering how the hard maple candies, the maple minis, were made? They're much darker brown, a hard candy. Is it a very different process than the sugar cakes?
Yep. So I'll take you in here and I'll actually show you them. So those little maple minis that you're referring to are also known as maple drops. The maple drops do have glucose added to them. So what happens is they heat the maple syrup up and they add the glucose to put it into the mold, and no stirring actually takes place. So no crystallines actually form in the structure, but it's the glucose that is actually going to cause it to harden. Now, as Jeremiah is walking in here, this is our stock room / shipping room. And he's highlighting some of the value-added products that we sell here. We have a maple barbecue sauce, maple hot sauce, maple mustard. We have a maple caramel corn, a maple walnut topping, maple spice rub. So right now on the shelf, we have over 40 different maple products. Some of them we make here in-house, and then some of them are made by other producers. This one here is puppy pancakes. So we have treats even for your dogs. And then I believe all of you got, some of you got samples of the maple cotton candy. That's something that we do make here. Something to note about the maple cotton candy, it's pure maple syrup that we turn into the granulated maple sugar, and we mix it with pure cane sugar. And that's all it is. So there's no red dyes and there's nothing else added. So a lot of kids who may be allergic to dyes can actually have this cotton candy, but not the cotton candy like the pink and the blue and that kind of stuff.
So Damian, I know that value added is a really important piece of your business model, obviously, as we stand in next to this array of products. Not giving us real numbers, but is there a percentage breakdown of what your sales look like as opposed to syrup versus value added products?
Yeah. So to kind of get into the percentage of it, I would say about 20% of our sales is syrup, and then 80% of our sales, and that would be not so much volume, but dollar wise, comes from the value added products. So one thing that's unique about the value added products is it's kind of the economics of getting smaller, right? We were talking about this earlier, Jeremiah and I were. So a gallon of syrup here at our store, we retail a gallon for 59, but we retail a half gallon for 35. So as you can see, the smaller you go in size, yes, there's an increase in container cost, but there is more margin there. Now, when you make value added products, it's in the name, value added. So like when we make granulated sugar, it doesn't equate to the same dollar amount if you turn it into pure syrup. So because of this, our farm is a small production farm. So only in that 6,000 tap range, we don't make a huge volume of syrup. Where we are able to market the most is in the value added, where we can take a little bit of maple syrup and stretch it into the mustards and the barbecue sauce and the hot sauce to have our increase in sales. And that's a huge part of our business. Christmas time, people come here and they love to buy Christmas gifts. So not only can they buy, just a quart of syrup, they can pick up 4 or 5 other maple goodies and even combine them to make them a maple gift basket, right? To give as a gift or a housewarming. There's a huge variety of options.
So we are going to pause in just a few minutes. I just have a couple last questions to ask, and then we'll be back with Damian in a little bit after we move through some of our lessons. So 2 questions. Julia wants to know, how much sap does it take to boil down to make one of the maple candies, one of your sugar cakes?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So I can tell you that roughly on a gallon of maple syrup, right? So you go 40 gallons of sap, makes 1 gallon of maple syrup. Then that 1 gallon of maple syrup is gonna make roughly 8 pounds of candy, okay? So then if you divide that out, right? So you got 16, and there are 16 ounces, and each one of them's a third of an ounce, okay? So you can do the math there. So it's 30 and 18, so you got 48 of them per pound. They're very minute. So it'd be 1/16 is gonna make 3 candies. This right here on camera is my mom. She's an active part of our business as well. So I don't have like a breakdown of syrup, if you will. Like it's probably in the ballpark of a couple tablespoons of syrup would make 1 candy.
So Carrie wants to know, are the hot sauces tamed down at all by the maple? Or are they not as hot?
No, so the hot sauces are still hot. Yeah. So what's cool about it is they're flavored with like habaneros and ghost peppers. So it's very like sweet at first, right? So you get that nice like palatable sweet, and then it's a hot, but it's a standing hot that grows.
So we are going to pause there. Jen and Nate have two awesome questions, but we're going to come back to those when we talk again with Damian. Damian, thank you so much for showing us around your operation and into your daily life, especially as we ramp up to maple season. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So we are going to get back with Damian in a little bit. I'm going to show you some resources. Jeremiah is going to transition over to lead the next lesson. You'll get to meet him. But I am going to show you some tools and resources that you may find interesting. So let me just share my screen here. I think a lot of you are familiar with our website, and probably the most powerful tool that we have on our website is the National Curriculum Matrix. This is an online searchable database of the best lessons from across the country. These tools are aligned to Common Core and continuously being added next gen science standard alignments. So this is a really powerful tool. I have the word maple in here per the season, but you can put any word in: dairy, fruit, vegetables, gardens, project-based learning, whatever you want. And you can do a quick search. You can see there's not a ton of maple lessons, but the maple lessons that are there are very high quality. So the beauty is every single lesson looks exactly the same. So you know what you're getting no matter what lesson you click on. There's a purpose, materials needed. The kind of nice part is if there is an essential file talked about in the lesson, that file is there for you. If it's a PowerPoint, the PowerPoint's already done. There are multiple vocab, background information, so you can feel confident talking about those lessons and tools, and then full instructions, resources. So videos also. So these are really full service lessons that can help you integrate food and agriculture in however you want into your classroom. Now, we also have companion resources, anything from books, multimedia resources, movies, videos. Those are all also available here. Now, I also want to show you, so while there's not a ton of lessons on the matrix about maple, our friends at New Hampshire Agriculture in the Classroom do have a collection of really great maple lessons, everything from pre-K to 12th grade. So we shared a few of those with you already, but it could be everything from making your own hydrometer to test sugar content, talking about maple temperatures, social studies lessons, sap value calculation. One of the ones I really love is about maple economics, and it's listed as a high school lesson, but I think feeling free to change that, scale it down for your students. It's really looking at the Canadian quota system versus our US free market system and how that is different, and what disadvantages or opportunities we have, our maple producers have. We're going to talk a little bit about a tubing layout design. I mean, think about Damian and how he's thinking about his layout of his farm. He is using the geography, the topography to his benefit. And so you being good, helping our students become good critical thinkers and map out these systems. It's just some very cool tools and resources that you could think about for your classroom. So I wanted to make sure you knew those existed. Some other things I think you should know about that are exciting and coming down the pike is that we are very, very proud to be the host for the National Agriculture in the Classroom Conference. It has never been hosted in New York State before. This is the premier professional development conference for teachers who want, just like you, who want to use food and agriculture in their classroom, but are looking for inspiration, best practices, new lessons, and it gives you a chance to collaborate with teachers from across the country who are just like you. I know sometimes it probably feels like you're the only person in your whole school or grade level group that are doing things like this or want to do things like this, but there's a whole network of teachers out there ready for you to meet. We really want to get you there. We want you to come to this conference. And the way that we're doing that is giving full scholarships. That's about a $900 value if you're selected, and it'll pay for your hotel accommodations, your full conference registration, and you'll get full access to the full conference. So I do need to, the website for the national conference just launched. So I'm gonna pop over and pull that up. And I'll put it in our follow-up. This is the link. I'm also gonna add it to our website, but this is the conference website where you can learn all about the exciting opportunities. Kind of the coolest part about this conference is you don't just stay stuck in a hotel ballroom. That is not the intention. Just like we're doing in our PD workshops, everything is hands-on. So you also get to get on a bus and go out and explore the region's agriculture. So you'll do everything from equine to dairy to going to a cheese processing facility, apple farming, better bee. If you know bees, they are the one of the largest suppliers of beekeeping supplies. They're going to open up a hive for you. There's a walking tour of Saratoga food and how it relates to the local food system with tastings involved. Fiber mills, where one of the remaining East Coast fiber mills are in Washington County, and you'll get to go and see how raw fleece you'll go to the farm, and then you'll see how that raw fleece is made into yarn. So that's kind of one of the neat parts about this conference. We'd love to have you join us. Those scholarship applications are due April 15th. And please sign up or put in a PD rec for your school. If you aren't successful in getting a scholarship, we'd love to have you there. What questions do you have? All right, Jeremiah, are you with us?
I am, Katie.
Awesome, perfect. Well, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am very pleased to introduce Jeremiah to you. He did great work setting up this great virtual PD and field trip, and we'll let him take over from here.
Okay, if you can just give me a second, let me unblur my background so you can see these awesome people next to me. So we're going to do a quick lesson, a quick show of hands. How many people were able, I know we had an issue with our shipping. How many people were able to get their boxes today? Did anybody get their boxes today?
No, I don't think so, Jeremiah.
Okay, well, in your box, you're going to get a few things. First is the maple starter kit that we're going to cover in another lesson, but you're also going to get a couple of samples of syrup from Schaefer Hill Farm. One is just a half pint for you to enjoy with your students, that give them a chance to sample the syrup. We're going to be sending you recordings to the virtual field trip, so you can kind of use that in experience, as well as some maple cotton candy. But the other thing that we're going to share with you is we put together, or the Schaefers put together, or the Hills put together a maple sample kit, and you're going to get all 3 grades of syrup. And we wanted to tie this to ELA lesson for you to be able to use at all levels. Let me go ahead and get my PowerPoint started. And so what we're going to do is first briefly go over the process of how SAP works. I know we went through it in the field, but Damon, do you think you could go through it?
Yeah.
About 1 minute.
Okay. So as we started in the field, you have the trees. So as the top, the process of photosynthesis is what's generating the sugars. So the sugar is already in the sap, right? So then it starts in the bottom of the trees, and then they're going dormant over the winter. So then during the spring during maple season, we call, is when the temperatures start to come up during the day and then go back down during the night. So what you're seeing is you have that freezing and thawing process in the tree, which causes the sap to go up and down the tree. With the spiles in the tree, we're able to capture a little bit of that sap. Now, we talked earlier about when to pull the taps. So there's really 2 times. The first time is when your flavor starts to go bad. The second time is when that freezing and thawing stops happening, and all the sap will actually be up in the crown of the tree. So therefore, the sap will no longer, quote, be running. So then there at the bottom, it says when the sap comes out, on average, it's 2% sap, and we got to get the sap at 2% all the way with a boiling process to 67% sugar to make your maple syrup.
So with that, and with that knowledge, with your students, we are pulling these sugars. So something that I like to really fascinated my kids when I taught, especially in 5th grade, we covered space, is to think that when you're drinking that sap or you're drinking the syrup, that's energy that came through space from our sun. So that traveled over 93 million miles that hit that leaf that helped to convert those different minerals. It's H2O and CO2, which is used to make sugar within the tree. That came through the whole void of space. And when you take a sip of this syrup, you are drinking star power, which is for students to think about that. It traveled 93 million miles to get to our little jars. It's really fascinating. So I love throwing that out to my students, especially when we started covering space. It just was kind of mind-boggling that they could drink some liquid star, which was fascinating. It really is also, when you're talking about different forms of energy, to think about that light energy that's traveling through space. You have your radio waves, you also have your heat energy. So it's that light energy that is causing photosynthesis. So when you get your sample kits, you're going to get a golden, you're going to get a amber, and personally my favorite, you're going to get a dark, and they're nice and labeled. And so I put a graphic organizer, and we were going to have y'all do this with us today. So when you get your samples, please enjoy them. But you can get all different grades. If you looked, I'm looking at a room just over my shoulder full of all the different grades. You can get those grades at your local maple producer or here at Schaefer Hill Farm. You can order those. And you would have your students sample, and they'd start to break down the different flavors that they identify. So we have the patriarch of the family, Mr. Hill, Dad Hill. Could you tell us a little bit about the different flavors that we get from golden, amber, and dark? We wanted you to be able to enjoy these and break them down yourself, but we're going to describe them as I hold them up. So first we have our golden, which is usually what you get early on in the season.
The golden syrup is a more delicate maple flavor. We usually make that in the beginning of the season when the days are cooler and temperatures aren't quite as warm. And then as the season progresses, we go into the amber grade, which is a little bit darker, has a little bit more maple flavor. That is the most popular table grade syrup there is. And then as the season nears the end, we go to the darker, which has a lot more maple flavor. It's a dark, robust flavor. And then eventually towards the tail end of the season, there's another grade that's called very dark, which is even darker yet. And a lot of people use that for cooking and baking.
And personally, I like the very dark. It has a very strong maple flavor. But when we're thinking about this Venn diagram, when we start to break out the golden, we're thinking of like a very delicate, a light maple flavor. The amber, you would say, is probably what we all know as syrup. That would be in most places. In the dark would be that really kind of strong flavor. So when we're thinking about the center of this Venn diagram, what could we say about all three that would be similar?
They're all the same sugar content, just different color and a little bit different flavor.
They all have the maple flavor, so we could do that compare and contrast with our students. So as you're doing this with your students, we really want them to be able to compare and contrast, which is a great ELA lesson. To use those components and really to start using this graphic organizer to put together their thoughts about their different syrup. From this activity, before we move on to the next step, anybody have any questions? Any questions about the different grades of maple syrup?
Yeah, sometimes they say like A or B or something. I'm not sure.
That's an awesome question. And I'll have that in the next slide, but we'll definitely answer that now. So there was two different types of
there used
grading.
to be two different types of grading. And here 2 years ago, we changed the way we grade maple syrup. So now everything is grade A. There is no such thing as grade B anymore. because it was kind of confusing to the consumers. And a lot of people thought the grade B was an inferior product, which it really wasn't. So now the very dark is called very dark, which used to be called grade B.
And they even had a C, which was a commercial syrup. So there was an A, B, C, and that.
Well, the C was mainly in Canada, not in the United States.
So the idea is that, like Mr. Hill said, that, you know, for me, my favorite is a dark robust, and that would have been towards a B. And people would have thought that was an inferior product compared to this delicate, which is a light maple flavor. And it's really about our preferences. So, you know, that's a great opportunity to talk about some character management. Is we have or character development is that we have these different preferences, but we all love maple syrup. So we can turn this into a great character development lesson as well.
Yeah, I noticed they had changed the letters and then they stopped doing it. But is it the dark has more vitamins or minerals? Is that a misnomer or?
So it's a little bit of a misnomer. So when you get into the very dark, there potentially is a little bit more minerals and vitamins. But for the most part, what causes it is way back at the sap level. It's the amount of bacteria and amino acids that are in the sap. So when it boils, its destiny is predetermined, right? So when that sap comes into the sugar house, as my father was saying, we typically make the golden in the beginning of the season, and then as it progresses, it gets darker and darker. And that's just because the amino acids, you know, the yeasty bodies, bacteria count, everything, it works its way up. And then when you boil it down, that's what's going to create your darker syrup. So as far as saying, you know, very dark is better for you than golden, that would be a misnomer.
And I think if you can look at this, let me go back, this last bullet point, the Maillard reaction. How many people, show of hands, how many people know what that is? Has anybody heard the term brown to flavor town? Watching your cooking shows? Anybody like a nice seared, juicy steak that has a nice seared, juicy crust? Or on that toast? Anybody like that darker toast? I like lighter toast, but I smear it with jelly, so it doesn't matter. Or maple cream. No offense, gentlemen. Welch's was in September, so I gotta get back to this PD. So the Maillard reaction is that browning, and and I'm going to share this PowerPoint with you, and I have a video included that helps break that down. There's a lot of chemistry involved. So one of the ideas, and there's a lot about sap and syrup, and maple production and trees and grades that we don't know. We know a lot, we know some, right? But there's a lot we don't know. Damian just came from Cornell, working with the Cornell Research Facility. And there are folks who have their whole career working on maple production. There's a lot, we don't know why it does what it does. We have an idea, but that's what gives your students an opportunity to engage in the industry and help answer those questions. So that Maillard reaction, as you have those amino acids and you have the thought is as you have more microbes, bacteria, as those start to cook down, that Maillard reaction affects that grade and gives you that darker color compared to that lighter color.
So Jen wants to know, is the grading system universal, or is this just a New York maple producer's grade?
So as my father said a couple of years ago, when they switched it over, it went from a state-specific grading system to an international grading system. So a lot of you may have heard the term Vermont Fancy. That is also known as golden maple syrup. So that's the lightest one. So now when you go and you buy maple syrup in Vermont, you buy it in New York, you buy it in Maine, Canada, all across the board, it's going to be now known as golden syrup. So basically the reason for the grade change was for the consumers because there was too much confusion.
Any other questions? So I'm going to pop back to this previous slide. So as you have your students, and as we're going to have you all do today, as they've started to break down these syrups and really start to identify preferences, they identify the differences, and they've compared and contrasted. There's a list of lessons here that you can take it to the next step. One thing that I love doing with my students is entrepreneurship. As we engage in agriculture, agriculturists aren't just making maple for fun, right, gentlemen?
Right.
Yeah, you got to pay the bills. You saw it's a beautiful facility. You have lots of equipment. So, really to have my students thinking back to our educational classes in college, we want that authentic play. So give them an opportunity to take what they have used in that Venn diagram and to start to develop a marketing plan for their favorite syrup. And see if they can market that syrup that they or that grade that they prefer. One of the standards I know, which is covered K through 12, especially thinking of ELA, is being able to argue your point and being able to do it respectfully and using skills. So you're doing the research through using your senses in that Venn diagram, and then having your students debate what syrup is the best and why is that the best. That's, for me, my kids love debate, and we always would debate as often as we can, especially when you're talking about who would win the marketing prize. And then the other idea is that you can take that Venn diagram and you can start to develop those different parts of writing. So you want to do, you want to infer, and you want to be able to develop to educate other people about the different syrups. So to develop those, that Venn diagram into an essay of what they experienced as they were tasting that syrup. So any questions about the grading lesson? How about, let's see, Clayton, is this something you think your students would engage? How would you engage your students with this lesson?
I think you hit on it with the debate, or turning it into any kind of real project. So if you could sell, or have them to think that they're going to market, like you were talking about, that'd be something that my kids are interested in, definitely.
And what level did you teach?
I teach third grade, but we did the top beef contest this year, and so that idea would parallel that, and they had a blast doing that.
I think we had, thank you. I think we had a biology teacher on. And I'm sorry we were out on the sugar bush, so I couldn't exactly see who it was. Do we still have our
I'm a biology teacher.
Julia, high school, right?
I'm sorry?
High school level biology?
Correct, yeah, 9th and 10th graders.
So how can you do science, kind of an ELA, so with science, class lesson, how might you use it in biology class?
I'm sorry, you're cutting in and out a little bit here. You're talking about
How might you use it in your biology class?
the actual grading lesson part?
Yes.
I haven't considered how I would use that. I wanted to actually turn this into a whole thing on plant transport, actually. I was hoping to switch my curriculum around next year and do that. But in terms of the grading, I haven't considered how I would do that in biology yet. But of course, bacterial presence, amino acid presence, those are clear connections. I did have a question that I threw in the chat. Do you mind me asking?
Certainly.
The bacteria presence, is that from the actual tree itself in the seasonal change? Is it from the fact that the tap is old and that it's growing in the tap? What is that from?
So it's a combination of both. So something I did when we were in the sugar bush, those blue spiles, we actually cut them off and we replace them every year. And then a new hole is drilled every year, right? So the reason why we're doing that is for tap hole sanitation, right? So there's natural bacteria that grows in the tree, and then there's bacteria that's going to grow artificially in the tubing network. So basically where the most amount of bacteria is going to be at the beginning of where the sap enters the system, which is the tap and that pink drop. So what we do is we replace the spile every year, and then every 3 to 4 years, we replace the drop. And then every 10 years, we're going to replace pretty much most of the system.
And that's natural. And it's one of the things that tells the tree to start healing itself. So as there starts to be bacteria buildup within the tap hole itself, that's why sanitation is very important for maple producers, is because that bacteria will send, the tree will send enzymes through the tree to tell it to start healing off that tap hole, which will shut off that sap flow.
I have another question if you don't mind.
I'm sorry, just a moment, Juliet. Jeremiah, could you turn your audio off and then back on? We're getting a lot of kind of funny feedback.
Yep.
Okay, good. I thought that was me. And I was like, oh, there's something wrong with my.
How's that?
No, it's still kind of funny. Maybe can you disconnect from it and reconnect possibly?
Is that better?
Let's move on and see if it gets any better. Jeremiah, I just wanted, before, we have a lot of great questions in the queue for the Hills. Are you comfortable? Do you want to transition out of this grading conversation and into the next piece?
Most definitely.
Great. So if we can just start rapid firing some questions, Julia, I'll let you go next. I know you had one on your mind.
Yes. It was about the process of removing taps and then replacing them. I read that it does like some scarring on the inside of the tree and that you need to be careful not to place it within like 6 inches of the old tap. Can you give a little advice on how to do that?
Yep. So in the sugar bush, your most important tool is your body. So one thing that we like to use is your hand. So say the old tap hole is right here at the top of your hand. You want to go the distance of your hand over and the distance of your hand down or up. So in quick judgment, that'd be about 2 to 3 inches over, left or right, and then 8 inches up or down. Okay. So, and if you think of it as like a vein of like a celery stalk, you don't want to tap into that same vein, and you also don't want to tap too close. So just like if you scratch yourself or cut yourself, like I was saying, there's going to be a scar that's in that tree, right? So then when you drill a hole in future years or the next year, you don't want to tap into that scar because it's not going to have good yielding sapwood, right? You're going to be like into scar tissue. So that's what you want to avoid. And then with the pulling of the taps, so the sap's going to stop running about late April. So there's actually a special tool, or you can use a hammer where it will go up in the spile. You use it as a lever and it'll pop the spile out. The reason why we pull those spiles out is because then in the off season for the rest of the year, it's giving that tree a chance to heal, right? So it would be considered bad practice to leave the spiles in the tree year round. Rather, for us, we pull them out, we cut them off, we plug it off, but we do leave the tubing system itself up year round, just not left in the tree.
Can you ever go back to that same area, or is there like a time where you give it before you go back to it in terms of the original tap that you put in?
Yep. So we face that problem a lot. So one thing that we face is like some of those bigger meteor trees, right? Have over 100, they're over 100 years old, right? So if you take a 2-foot diameter tree and you have 100 holes in there, you're like, probability I'm gonna nail another hole, right? So the biggest thing is that we avoid tapping into like right in the center of an old hole. So as Jeremiah was showing you on some of those older maple trees, you could see those older holes. So if once they're fully grown in, you can tap close to them. The biggest thing is when they get really old to not go directly above or directly below them.
So we have a great question from earlier from Jen. I think her facts teacher mind was going as she saw all the different maple products. In the last few years, she's seen sap bottled and sold at Wegmans, kind of marketed as a health beverage. Do you see many maple producers jumping on board with this?
So some maple producers are. What's really unique about it, so we're going back to that value added process, right? So with sap, unfortunately, it's a very fragile liquid. So you can't just take regular sap and put it in a water bottle. What would actually have to happen is there has to go through a homogenation process. So what they're doing is they're homogenizing it or pasteurizing it of some sort and then able to bottle it. So with that sap, a lot of the producers that are selling that sap. So for example, a gallon of syrup is, $59 a gallon retail. With sap, it takes 40 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. You can sell that gallon of sap water at, a much lesser rate.
So Nate, your neighbor there in Delaware County, he said not to be a Debbie Downer, but do you expect syrup prices to go up a lot because of the increase of fuel prices?
So I think it's going to be a typical economic structure, right? So prices never really soar. They're not supposed to in agriculture. You will see a slight increase in price, but there's multiple variables that are affecting it. So one, last year was a little bit lesser of a crop for most people. So like us personally, we faced a 2/3 of a crop. However, with that, this year seems to be a normal cycle, if you will. We've got the normal temperature fluctuation, and we've got a little bit else that, what I would call more normal. One thing to keep in mind, the biggest driver is actually has nothing to do with production. It's more or less because of you, the consumers. Right now, maple syrup is actually on the rise of consumption, which we as producers really like. So with that, you have companies up north and especially Canada. Canada just set out the goal to add 7 million taps over the next 5 years. So with that, we know that probably in the course of 10 years, the maple industry has the capacity to actually double.
So thank you, Damian. So Dater wants to know, I've heard that producing maple trees are moving northward because of climate change. Have you noticed this?
So we personally haven't. I'll be honest with you, I would say that the maple region is actually expanding north and south. I'm sure just like anything, right? It's all cyclical. So if we could look in the future, 1,000 years, and we could say, okay, will, the maple tree region go north? If things start to get colder or start to get warmer, I'm sure you're going to see that. But in what you and I would call our lifetime, I would say not necessarily. You're not going to see maple trees start to die off in New York State. So sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to show you this. This is a wafer that we cut out of one of our logs in one of our sugar bushes. So here, where you can see all the stained woods, that actually represents a tap hole. So every single one of those stains is roughly a tap hole.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Damian, but the audio has fluctuated again. Maybe if you could disconnect again and reconnect. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Is that any better or no?
No.
Still bad?
Yes, but it got better. So let's hope it'll get a little better again.
Okay. If you don't hear something, just have me repeat it. So each one of these stains represents a tap hole. So like this one right here, you can see how it's really far from the bark. That would be an older tap. However, some of these that get down closer to the edge of the tree, those would be a more recent tap. So unfortunately, this tree, you can't quite see it, but it's starting to get what we call punky up here in the upper corner. And our friends, the woodpeckers, hit the tree. So the tree actually started to die. So as Jeremiah shows you, this is about a 6-inch wafer, and this is where the woodpecker actually hit. So that's what started to slowly kill the tree. So we actually harvested one of our sugar bushes this year, and we cut this wafer out to show our customers and to use it as a learning example. But as you can see, there is roughly, Jeremiah and I roughly counted about 20 taps per quarter. So that means there's 80 to 100 tap holes in this maple tree. Now, keep in mind, that's in a section of maybe 2 to 3 feet of that tree at about 4.5 feet high, right at your chest height where you would normally measure the diameter of the tree.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for showing us that. What a cool visual tool. Before we have another question just in the queue, but Jeremiah, would you be able to transfer your audio to your phone? That might be a little bit easier to hear.
Yeah, he said he's gonna try.
So with that, as he's working on that, Damian, the next question for you to think about, what is the process in the tree that produces deeper colors? Is it the fermentation or something else?
So the deeper color you're talking about in the tree?
In your final syrup product.
Oh, in the final syrup product. Okay. So yeah, so that goes back to what we were talking about before with the bacteria, the amino acids, the microbes and stuff like that. So when that bacteria is introduced into the sap, that is then going to pass through the boiling process. So when you boil the sap, all those are going to pass through, and then through that Maillard boiling process, that's where you're going to get that brown flavor and brown color. So I'm going to mute. Back on Jeremiah's phone. Is that any better? So you got to turn that volume up.
I hear it.
Can you hear that, Katie?
Katie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. It sounds better, a little echoey, so just let Jeremiah know he has to disconnect his audio from his laptop. So so we can also have Damian share a little bit of why he became a maple producer, but are there any other burning questions about process or what you've seen?
I have a question with like filtering and stuff with your syrup. The diatomaceous earth, is that something that like, or I guess what does it do? Like, you know, should you use it? Like we just do some simple like cone gravity filter, you know, will that do something different if we use that?
Small scale. No, so the diatomaceous earth is what's going to be used at a larger scale. So if you're just doing, you know, a couple dozen taps or whatever, your cone filters, cheesecloths, stuff like that, that's a good filtration process. The purpose of the diatomaceous earth is because on those cone filters, you're only going to get about a gallon, maybe 2 gallons of syrup through them. So that would mean on our arch, I would be going through 60 of those every hour. Right. So like somebody would have to be sitting there like shifting in new filters every minute. So it's not really feasible. So the development, I showed you that filter press. So the purpose of the diatomaceous earth is twofold. So when you charge the press, the diatomaceous earth is actually crushed up seashells, and it actually scratches that paper. So that little sample filter paper that you got, the seashells scratch the paper and cause them to be more, increase their filtration level, right? But then more importantly, what happens is this would be a good chemistry and biology lesson. I can tell you that the niter actually creates a ionic bond to the diatomaceous earth. So the diatomaceous earth, it's kind of like when you look at them, you probably remember those like Febreze commercials, right? Where they've got that bubble that captures the fish odor. Same thing. The diatomaceous earth has its little bubble, and it's going to capture that niter, that sugar sand, and make it a bigger molecule that then won't let it pass through those filter papers.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yeah, I have to say, as a small scale, much smaller than Damian, I use synthetic filters that you can get. You can also get real animal wool filters, and they're for the small scale. That's really all you're going to need. You're just going to do a gravity filter, and then you can quickly rinse those. One of the things is you never want to use soap on those, and you want to rinse them. You don't want to wring them out because then you're going to start creating holes in that filtration. So at the small scale, at the school scale, I think there may be, I don't know, do you have those?
Yes.
$20?
Yeah. Yep.
And they're a big square, and you can usually I usually cut them in quarters, and you get 4.
Yeah.
Which would fit over a bucket.
So Scott has a great question. He read an article a few years back about researchers at the University of Vermont topping off 7-year-old maple trees in an orchard style planting and getting sap from them. It said they got the same amount of sap in 1 acre compared to maybe around 25 acres in a sugar bush. Do you see the industry going this route or know of anyone doing this?
Jeremiah and I were actually talking about this. So that was a research, what they were doing, and that specific maple tree is not a maple tree that you can find in nature. So that I will say, keep in mind one. So it is kind of a genetically modified product. So what they were doing is they would grow the stalk. So similar to like in your grape industry where they grow the root stock. So they would grow the stalk of the tree. They'd grow them for about, I think it was like 7 to 8 years. And then they would like whack the top of the tree off, and they would put like a bag over the top and harvest all the sap off of it. So it was very highly productive. I personally don't know of any that brought it to a commercial scale, right? So there might be some hobbyists in their backyard that are doing a couple dozen of them. But the infrastructure that it would take was really massive because that the tree took 7 years, just like a Christmas tree farm, right? Like you can't grow a Christmas tree in 1 year on an acre of land. So that would mean you would have to have 7 times what you actually need to produce. So then you would have one stage of land that's going to be growing those trees for 6 years that are no production. And if anything, because that crop is going to be taking a lot of nutrients from the soil, you'd probably actually have to do a crop rotation, or you'd have to leave the land fallow because you're going to be pulling so much minerals and so much from the soil that it would actually be very poor for soil health.
And I think from the study that they found, they were able to do 400 taps per acre compared to what we saw in the traditional sugar bush was 60 to 80. But the idea was it was going to be a rotational. They would till those trees and to put the nutrients back, but then you're starting all over again. So I haven't seen anything else. It was very interesting. And if you get a chance, I'll try to put that in the follow-up email. It's a very interesting article, just thinking of the innovation within the industry.
So Jeremiah, we're at 4:41, and we'll let you transition into our last lesson today.
Perfect. And as we're doing that, does anybody have any questions while we're getting out our kit? So one of the things that you will get in the package that is coming, along with the maple syrup and the cotton candy, I'd love to receive some pictures when you do get them, you and your students open them up. You will be getting, and let me get my camera back up so I can, you will be getting a beginner tapping tubing kit. So what this is used for, is just like what you saw in Damian's sugar bush. You will have the opportunity to set this up at your school. But one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is the science behind, excuse me, we have some customers calling in. So we're gonna fill an order real quick. We're live in Agriculture Live. So a couple of the ideas behind this is really focusing on gravity, because this is a gravity fed system. So as well as with the kit, we did send you a little funnel so that you'll be able to dump water into one end of the tubing system, and you and your students can test it in the classroom. If you don't have maple trees and you can't tap, then you can test it in the classroom by just using pure water. So you can see the challenge that we would put to our students. One of the STEM activities, and with the next generation standards, the idea is about that inquiry-based learning. So you would pair this with the gravity lesson. And the other lesson that I thought would be fascinating to pair this with is when you're talking about your different states of matter, like we saw in the sap. You could take this tubing system outside and see how the different states of matter affect the sap flow with your classroom by just using water. If you want to go all out, you can add 2% of water or 2% of sugar to your water and make your own little maple sap. And you can test that. You'll see that the freeze thaw is a little different than just pure water. So you'll get this kit. And we're just going to take a look at the different components. Damian's going to kind of show us what the different components do so that when you get the kit, you know what it does. I like to leave it open-ended to my students so that they can experiment and they can try to put together those pieces within this challenge. In the challenge that we've created, the kit has 5 drop lines. You could give each group a drop line and a little bit of hose so that they had to create their own to see if they can get the flow of water to fall all the way down their sap line system. So it's a beautiful kit, and we're going to pull out a couple pieces and just kind of describe them to you.
Yep. So this first roll that Jeremiah is handing over, so you're gonna get a 100-foot roll of tubing. So this tubing and all the fittings is 5/16, just so you know. There are some parts of the industry that use a 3/16 model, but this is all 5/16 for now. So you have 100 foot, so you definitely have the opportunity to put it together and you can take it back apart. So what you'll notice is there's 3 different types of fittings. So this fitting that I'm gonna start with, it's called an end hook. So it's pretty obvious that it's got that little hook on there.
Jeremiah, could you stop your screen share so that we could see Damian a little bit bigger with the materials? Thanks.
There we go. All right, so you'll see the hook that's on there, and the purpose of the hook is to go on the end of the tree. So in this kit, you're gonna get 2 of the end hooks. Now, what you'll see is on these fittings, I don't know if you can quite see it, but they're what we call a barbed fitting. So I've got a sample piece of tubing here. So with a little bit of pressure, they're gonna go ease right on. They hook together. So in the sap woods, we have a special tool that puts them on. But being if you're in the classroom and it's warm, the fittings will go right in. So then what you're gonna do, one thing that some people like to do is use the students as a tree themselves, right? So you can use one kid as your end tree, if you will. So they get wrapped in tubing all the way around. And then this hook will hook back on itself. There's a picture diagram on the box that'll explain that a little better. But essentially what's gonna happen is, since the tubing goes all the way around and then hooks on, you then are also gonna get a drop line with this end hook. Then when you go down, so remember how we went from, there was multiple trees on the little lines. So then next you're gonna have what we call a T, okay? So you can tell that it's a T because there's no hook on this one. So then this one right here, you'll see, so you want the sap to go left and right. So that's how you know this middle prong is a drop line. So if you hook it up this way, right, we don't want the sap to go on the ground. So that's how you know that you want it to be turned. Now on the flip side, there's this cup. And so as I was telling you, at the end of the season, when we pull our taps, we plug them off. That's what this little cup is for. It's able to plug the tubing right off. So you'd have a loop of tubing that goes all the way back into the drop. Okay, so now with your system that you have set up, you have the option to run 2 lateral lines, or you can do multiple drop lines with your students. It kind of depends on how many students are there, and if you want to change the lesson up, you can. And then you have the spiles. So the unique part about these plastic spiles, so the spile comes up here at a 45 degree, and then it goes 90 degrees into the tree. And then this, where it's a little miscolored on the end, that's where they would tap it into a tree. If some of you get ambitious and want to go cut a log that the students are actually going to be able to drill, you can teach them, how you would tap that tree in and how you'd want to drill the hole straight into the tree, but not too deep. You're only going to be drilling in about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches. So that's the whole kit, but it's pretty versatile and it's reusable from year to year. So as Jeremiah said, you're going to be provided with a little filter, or a little cone, sorry. So what you can do is you would place the cone at the end and you could pour water into it. So if you have your students make a actual whole little tubing system, you could pour water in the drop line where the tap would be, and you can see, is it an airtight, is it a water leak proof system? And then, see what happens when you bend the drop line and you pour water in. Will it actually come out? Will it not? If you kink it, what happens? Maybe take a pair of shears and put a slit in it, and as the water passes by, it leaks. And you can explain, why that would, endeavor a yield loss.
So when you're using these kits, it's just food grade plastic. So you can easily take a pair of your teacher scissors and cut through the hose line. You don't need any special tools. One of the things that I found is that you can, if you just put while you're putting your drop lines and adding your fixture or your fittings, if you just soak it in a little warm water and let your drops sit in some warm water, that will start to make it a little more pliable and easier to put on your fittings while you're in the classroom. Any questions about the kit that you'll be receiving?
Jessica wanted to know what size tubing works with the end hook. Is it 5/16?
Yep. So everything in the kit is 5/16, which is really cool because then, so the whole purpose of the kit is that you don't have to buy anything, right? It's all right here that you can use. And the students are a great tool. Like I said, you can use them as trees. You can explain, the different lines and stuff like that. So I just threw this one here together real quick. So you can see the T is at the bottom. And then here's your drop line where it would go into the tree.
And the only thing that you will need is a 5/16 bit and a drill and a hammer if you're going to put actual taps in. You can buy specific 5/16 maple bits that are made for the industry. If you get a wood 5/16 bit, that should work as you're engaging for the first time. But if you're something that you would want to do more, I would highly suggest getting a maple specific 5/16 because it is a little different. And like we talked about, it takes 40 years to grow, 30 to 40 years to grow those trees. So we really want to respect and conserve our resource and treat those trees with respect because it does take so long for it to get to the point where we can tap it.
So Julia wants to know, is there any difference in efficiency of the types of taps that are used? I'm currently using some of the old style metal taps with the hooks to hang a bucket from.
Yeah, so that's a commonly asked question. Some of it is preference. So from company to company, the biggest thing that I would recommend, those metal spouts that you're using, if they're the bigger ones, they're going to tend to be a 7/16 hole. So think about it, if somebody's digging a hole into you, right? Do you want a bigger hole or do you want a smaller hole? You'd want the smaller hole. And I can tell you that the yield from the smaller hole is just as much from the bigger hole. And the tree health is actually increasing because it has a smaller hole that it needs to repair. Now, like the taps that you saw in our woods were blue and they had a check valve in them. These ones are clear and they don't have a check valve in them. They're a straight shot. Okay. So the reason for the check valve is more beneficial on the gravity or on the vacuum system. So what's going to happen is as the sap comes out of the tree and goes down the drop line, it won't let the sap go back up in. So whereas with these on the gravity system, you won't see that retract as much because there's not as much vacuum imbalance. So what'll happen is during the warm days, the sap will run down. When it freezes, more or less the sap will stop. So as far as efficiency goes on a small scale, there's not a noticeable difference.
Something that is really cool about this kit also is you can get some small pressure gauges that will fit this 5/16 hole. And you can put that on the end of your kit and you can see how much, depending on how you raise and how much slope that you have, you can see that natural vacuum that's created. And you can actually, just like when we saw up in the sugar bush, we saw that pressure gauge. You can purchase in there probably a few dollars.
Yeah, $9-10.
So you can see how that pressure changes through the day. And that's something that you can also monitor with your students. If you want to take it to a step further, we've sent you a 5/16 kit. There is 3/16, which is used in a lot of sugar bushes, which they don't put on vacuum that creates a high vacuum. So you could purchase a 3/16 line and create a similar kit and test and compare and contrast the two. 3/16, you're going to need to have that drop, and that's really what's going to change that pressure, that vacuum. But you will see a noticeable vacuum with 3/16. That the reason being is because it creates a full column of sap, and that sap pulling through creates a vacuum within the line. And in a lot of sugar bushes, they can create high vacuum without having to have any infrastructure like a vacuum pump. So you could take it to that next step. 3/16 is also cheaper. All these products are not very expensive. I would say to put this kit together, it would probably be, if you just sourced it, maybe $10-15.
Yeah.
Yeah. And 3/16 would be cheaper.
So Teresa wants to know if collecting from a bucket or a bag, can you store the sap in food grade buckets until you're ready to boil?
Yep, you can. So the key part there, Katie, is food grade. So unfortunately, you'll see a lot of people are storing sap in things that are not food grade. That's a very risky situation. I don't promote that, and I wouldn't say to practice that, especially with students. the biggest thing is you can store it, but don't store it too long. So sap is very fragile and it will go bad. So if you collect the sap today, right, and then you hold it through the weekend, it would be okay if you wanted to boil it on Monday. It's when you start to hold it over that week time period, or if you have really warm temperatures. So like if you collect the sap and you bring it into your classroom because you don't want anything getting into it, and you have 60 degrees in there over, the weekend, you come back in on Monday, it's going to already have fermented and gone bad. And that there's no like going back. So if you turn that fermented sap into syrup, you're going to have a bad flavored syrup for the students.
I would say with that, holding the sap, there is a cool experiment that you can do, especially if you get a hydrometer and do that hydrometer lesson, is you can condense sap by freezing it. And what you would do is, especially like today, we had a run last week.
Yep.
And then it went below freezing. If you left that and let that sap freeze, you could pull that ice off, which would condense that solution, and that sap that you have left over, you can condense it down to 7-10% by just pulling the ice out of the bucket. And that's another great experiment you can do with your students. It's just like adding salt to salt water and how that changes the boil freeze and what's left over. So there's another great experiment there, Teresa.
That's correct, Julia. So with that statement, she's asking in the chat, so the ice won't contain any sugar. And the reason being is sugar won't freeze. So if you have that 2% sugar content in sap and it freezes, only the pure H2O is going to freeze. The sugar is going to stay suspended.
So even if you're friends with the food staff, you might be able to see if you can borrow their cooler if you want to pull that experiment off if it's starting to get warm outside. It is really neat to see how that condenses and becomes denser as a solution.
What other questions are there?
So at my school, so our kind of couple trees, they're all scattered, but I do have 3 that are kind of like right in a row. It would be like really cool, like what you guys were explaining with like the drop lines and stuff. Like it is pretty level. So like, would we still be able to like say kind of connect those 3 trees together with tubing like into, a bigger bucket at like the end of one of them?
Yeah, so exactly. So you could actually utilize the kit to do that if you wanted. Or purchase some fittings to do the same thing. So the tree on the end, you would use your end hook, right? That would go around the tree and hold it suspended there. And then your next tree, you would go with a regular T to a drop line. Then you'd run another piece of hose to the next one, put that, and then your last piece of hose, you would tail down into your collection bucket. And since that, where that tail goes down into your collection bucket, from there to your beginning tap, it was considered slope. That sap gravity will actually pull that sap out of the tubing down into the bucket.
And I will be sending you with the follow-up. You will get a video of how to install this kit so that you can get a general idea of how the kit is used. Every sugar bush is different. So, you're going to cut it a little different, but the components like the end anchors, drop lines, lateral lines, those will be the same. It's just going to be different how you configure those. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'm good.
Yeah. And like I said before at the beginning, guys, sorry, Katie.
No, go ahead.
Feel free to give us a call, shoot us an email, anything that you want. The kit has 100 feet of tubing.
And I would say you get a 500 roll. You can get a 500 roll of tubing for about $40-50.
Yeah.
And Schaefer Hill, they also provide equipment. So
yeah. So if you guys want to purchase more taps, go to the link. We have an equipment section, or you can even send us a direct email. We have all the tubing and we have other supplies for the maple production process as well.
Well, we are right at time. And before I give my big thank yous to Damian and his family, I do want to let you know, so you're going to receive a follow-up email. In that email, you're going to receive your evaluation. The last page of your evaluation is the form you need to fill out to be able to receive your CTLE. So those will be processed, those certificates, in the next month or so. Of course, we would love your feedback on the PD and hope to see you using your kits and enjoying the maple season with your students. Damian, we are so grateful to you and your family for inviting us into your operation. We know this is the busy time of the year, but you made our day so very special for our students and our teachers across the state. Damian, I will remind you all, Damian is 22 years old. So just keep that in mind. He's a pretty exceptional young man. I met his dad in the parking lot of the Maple Conference and just couldn't say enough good things about him. So lucky for him and his family to be in our orbit. Thank you to Jeremiah for spending the day in the woods. I know that's a hardship for him. He just hates that. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate you and your interest in maple. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for letting me share with you.
We
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.